Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar this afternoon. My name is Tracy Williams, and I am the chair of SEER's Pro Bono Task Force. SEER created the Pro Bono initiative to provide pro bono opportunities to its members. It has partnered with two organizations, the Legal Pathways to Deep Decarbonization and the American Geophysical Union's Thriving Earth Exchange. Today, you will hear from both of our partners, and we also have set aside time for a Q&A session toward the end of the webinar. However, if you have questions during a presentation, please feel free to put those in the chat box, and we will make every effort to answer those. And with those remarks, I will turn it over to Blake McGackie with Thriving Earth Exchange.
Thank you so much, Tracy. It's a pleasure to be here and to share a bit more about Thriving Earth Exchange and to invite all of you to use your legal expertise to advance community resilience.
Yeah, I have trouble.
Oh, and environmental justice. So Thriving Earth Exchange is a program of the AGU, which stands for the American Geophysical Union. Our name is a bit of a misnomer, though, because we have over 130,000, Earth and Space scientists and affiliates in over 140 different countries. Our members study everything from the core of the Earth to the surface of the sun and just about everything in between. And we call ourselves the union, but we're really a nonprofit science association. But anyway, Thriving Earth Exchange is a program of AGU that works to connect communities with pro bono technical support through our membership and other networks to help advance community identified priorities related to natural hazards, natural resources, natural disasters, sustainability, climate change, really anything related to the environment. So our program has been operational since 2014, and since then we've launched over 250 different projects with over 500 community leads and nearly 400 volunteer scientists in 45 different states and now 11 different countries. And you can check out a lot of these projects at thrivingearthexchange.org/projects for kind of, brief descriptions and updates. So now I'd like to give a brief kind of description of what we do and our approach. So we advocate for an approach called community science, and it's the process through which communities and scientists, do science together. And that's everything from coming up with questions together, co-designing projects together, and then analyzing and collecting data together, and then using that to inform future decision-making in ways that are guided by community voice, community knowledge, and ultimately result in community impact. We aim for our approach to community science to center communities who have been, historically underserved and marginalized by science and scientific institutions, and again, to center and follow the leadership of local knowledge and community priorities. So our model is flexible, and we hope to tailor it to different communities, different contexts, but we have three main phases: scope, match, and solve. First, communities work with a volunteer project manager to co-design a project through a series of conversations. Based on that, they move into match, where their project manager recruits the relevant pro bono technical support. And then finally, once the team is assembled, they solve and carry out the project. And in the spirit, we ask that they of Thriving Earth, we ask that they share what they're doing so other communities can adapt and replicate to advance their own priorities. So now with that kind of overview of our program, I'd love to share a few examples. And one is from New Orleans around undoing environmental racism related to an interstate corridor. So a core principle of Thriving Earth Exchange and community science is that a paper alone is not an outcome. In this project, it engaged children to use balloons to collect air quality kind of measurements in and around the I-10 corridor as a part of a comprehensive effort to document the impacts of air, water, soil quality, and noise levels. And a community lead there, her name is Amy Stelly, used that data as a part of a relentless advocacy campaign to raise awareness about the damage caused by the elevated freeway that was built right through the center of a thriving African-American community for over 60 years before the interstate was built. The work was later cited in Biden's infrastructure plan, and I can share an article about this work. A more recent project that finished just this summer in Santa Rosa County, Florida, was around promoting sustainable development. The county's population had nearly doubled since 2000, but that rapid growth was putting a strain on the natural resources and natural environment that brought so many folks to the area in the first place. So grassroots groups came together and worked with pro bono support to develop an interactive map that kind of demonstrated risks to inland flooding from proposed development, as well as previous and proposed efforts to promote flood resilience. The community map that they developed of different assets and natural and built infrastructure became a go-to reference and impactful tool for efforts to promote more sustainable development throughout Santa Rosa County, including for grants, revising the land development code, and so on. So, and their project really highlighted how community science projects are just one step in a much longer path, aiming to result in direct impact and seeding a much longer culture shift toward community science. So now I'm joined by a community lead who has led a project in Fairfax County, Virginia, Eric Gopalrud from the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, who was also matched with the pro bono legal support through ABA SEER. So Eric, I'd love to turn it over to you to share more about that experience and encourage folks to get involved. So thank you for being here.
Okay, thanks a lot, Blake. And if we could have the PowerPoints put up. I'm Eric Gopalrud. I'm the board chair of an organization called the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions. What we do is we organize the power of Virginia's faith communities to advance local solutions to the urgent moral crisis of climate change. What we do is get people out of the pews and out in front of their elected leaders in a way that you can directly see what the outcomes are and hold the elected leaders accountable. Next slide. This is kind of a busy slide, but what it basically says is we move for local focused advocacy that will have an impact on greenhouse gases, increase community resilience, and address racial and environmental injustice. And our sort of theory of change is through advocacy, we get local policy changes, which then lead to social justice solutions. Next picture, next slide. The question that we asked ABA SEER was, there's an incredible amount of cleared space on the sides of our highways, in highway interchanges, in transmission line and pipeline rights-of-ways. And we developed a fairly focused question. Under federal and state law, can renewable energy projects be permitted in highway rights-of-ways so that it would benefit environmental justice communities? And if so, how could we get that process started? Next slide. We were fortunate enough to get a third-year law student who was working with ABA SEER and was the right kind of lawyer. What he did was to answer the question that we had in a positive way and to show that both federal law, state law, and local regulations not only allowed, but encouraged the development of solar and renewable energy in rights-of-ways. Next slide. So what we did with it was then share that with county and state transportation officials and have been lobbying, we educate on the basis of this legal opinion with county and state elected officials and also government officials to make changes that will promote distributed power through use of rights-of-ways and brownfields and others. So this is something that we can hold up and say, you've got the authority and we provide the will. Next slide. So this is just a shameless pitch for who we are. Again, the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, or our acronym is FACTS, and my contact information. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Eric. Sorry about that. And, as Eric's kind of work demonstrated, and our program at Thriving Earth, we acknowledging that science is not enough. We've been working with ABA SEER since 2020, and as a way to sort of connect, our community projects through Thriving Earth with additional pro bono legal support. So with that, we would invite you to get involved as well. Through ABA's intake process, they review, requests for pro bono support from Thriving Earth communities. In addition, we invite you to sort of sign up as an expert volunteer, and as issues might come up, we would be delighted to connect you. And if you or anyone might be interested in learning more about our approach to community science, we have a community science fellow program where we train folks to work directly with communities and come up and implement community science projects. So applications for those things are available at thrivingearthexchange.org. And thank you all, and we look forward to sharing a bit more about our program in the Q&A section. So Tracy, I think back to you.
Great, thank you, Blake. And now we will hear from Rick Horsch at Legal Pathways to Deep Decarbonization.
Well, thank you, Tracy. I'm Rick Horsch. I coordinate the drafting process for the Legal Pathways to Deep Decarbonization Project. What I plan to do is provide you with an overview of the project and describe how our model laws are prepared. I will also discuss how you or your firm can participate. Carla Perry, who is a member of our outreach team and coordinates our climate justice initiative, will then discuss some successes in getting laws and language adopted by lawmakers, and will also discuss the project's climate justice initiative. Jordan Giroux, who is the project webmaster, will then walk you through the project website, pointing out model laws, as well as other climate resources on the site, which I think makes it quite a useful research tool. Finally, Daniel Loud will describe how young associates can get involved and, more importantly, get their firms involved. Next slide. So let me first describe the project itself. It involves drafting model laws to address climate change and making those laws available to legislators at every level of government. This provides them with legal tools to decarbonize all sectors of the energy economy. Next slide. We have dozens of law firms and individual lawyers who are already participating as drafters or as peer reviewers or assisting in outreach. All the work done for the project is done pro bono. Next slide. The model laws are based on recommendations from a book titled Legal Pathways to Deep Decarbonization in the United States. It was put together by professors Michael Girard at Columbia Law School and John Dernbach. It is a playbook of state, federal, local, and private legal options that will enable the U.S. to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050, hence deep decarbonization. The book itself has some 35 chapters written by 60 authors who are experts in their field, and each chapter covers a specific section of the energy economy and discusses how to decarbonize that sector. For example, energy generation or transportation, agriculture, new buildings, existing buildings, etc. Next slide. Here is the book, definitely worth purchasing. I never leave home without it. Next slide. Each chapter in the book recommends 30 to 40 legal actions that can be taken to address climate change. In total, the book has almost 1,500 recommendations. I've listed on this slide and the next a few of those recommendations to give you a feel for what we're talking about. As you can see, there are actions that can be taken not only at the federal level, but recommendations for what action can be taken at the state level, at the city level, next slide, at the local government level, and by private actors. Next slide. And the purpose of the project is to turn these recommendations into model laws that can be used by legislators. And we've seen legislators use them, either adopting them wholesale, or maybe they'll take the model law, compare it to something they're working on, and sort of take language out of our model and add it to an existing law. So there's many different ways that legislators can use this. Next slide. In addition, of course, to drafting model laws, we established a website where they can be found. We launched the website in April of 2020. It contains model laws that have been drafted and peer-reviewed. To date, we have more than 55 model laws, and each of the model laws has its own explanatory memo to guide the legislator or the legislative aid in the purpose of the law and what it is intended to do. As Jordan Giroux will explain, the website also contains additional laws and resources addressing climate mitigation. Many of these are laws that have been adopted by states and other jurisdictions, and it makes the website, I think, a terrific tool for climate change research. Next slide. This slide shows, it's a diagram of the drafting and peer review process. Let me walk through it. In the first step, a drafter will select a recommendation from the book, undertake initial background research. The drafter will then prepare a 1 to 2 page document that summarizes the model law that they plan to draft, sets out a timeline and some basic information. This is really to focus the drafter's thoughts and efforts to really synthesize in 1 to 2 pages what he or she intends to do. We call this document a template. Once the template is approved, the drafter prepares a draft of the model law. And then in the next step, each model law is peer reviewed before it is considered ready for posting. Next slide. We've recruited more than 80 experts as peer reviewers. Who are our peer reviewers? Some are law professors, some are industry lawyers. We have financial experts, present and former government officials, engineers, and a few chapter authors themselves. Next slide. As a final step, we reach out to policymakers to ensure that there is a demand for the model laws. We call this process our outreach process. And this slide shows a diagram of the outreach process. Carla Perry, who is part of the outreach team, will discuss the successes we have had in that process. Next slide. To date, we've had more than 36 law firms and a large number of individual attorneys participate as drafters. I've set out here some of the names of the participating firms, but there are many more firms involved. A number of firms have agreed to draft model laws, but frankly, given the politically charged nature of climate change, have asked to remain anonymous, and of course, we honor that request. Next slide. So we have a good number of drafters, a good number of model laws, but more are needed. So the question is, how can you get involved? Next slide. If you are a lawyer, a law firm, in-house counsel, or a law professor, you can get involved in many different ways. You can take responsibility for a recommendation or more than one recommendation and draft model laws. We have some law professors and senior lawyers overseeing either law students or teams of students drafting model laws. You have deep expertise in a particular area, you can serve as a peer reviewer. If you have relationships, contacts with legislators, you can assist in outreach. In other words, depending on your experience and background, you may want to participate either in drafting, in peer reviewing, or in outreach, or as a surprising number of lawyers have done, all three. I should also mention that the typical process of getting law firms involved is, as you might expect, a partner at a firm agrees to bring the firm along, sets up a team of associates, and gets the drafting process done. You're going to hear from Daniel Loud, who was a young associate at a major international law firm who turned the formula on its head. He decided the project was worthwhile, and as a first-year associate, convinced his firm to participate, brought the firm in, structured, brought together groups, and actually drafted a terrific model law, which has been published on our website. But just by coincidence, Daniel's firm is one of those that wishes to remain anonymous, so he's going to be speaking on his own behalf and not on behalf of the firm. Next slide. If you're a law student, you can also get involved, provided there is significant oversight either by a senior lawyer or a law professor or a law clinic. If any of those listening are involved in law clinics, I think this would be a terrific project for a law clinic to get involved in. Next slide. Well, that concludes my portion of the presentation. This is my contact information. Please reach out to me if you have interest in participating in any way. Next, you're going to hear from Carla Perry, who's going to talk about the outreach process and our climate justice initiative. So take it away, Carla.
Thank you very much, Rick. That was a great presentation, and I hope it demonstrates to everybody that there really is a methodical process that we go through. We're very careful. We pride ourselves on scholarship and a lot of depth. The reason we've been able to be successful is because it's just that scholarship, Columbia Law School, Widener University Law School, and all of our wonderful firms that bring their expertise to the project. So I have 3 slides on successes. One of our first successes, next slide please, is we actually drafted a provision that it turns out was in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was passed into law earlier this year. And it was on the interoperability for EV chargers, meaning that as car companies develop EVs, we want to make sure the chargers can be used by anyone. That levels the playing field for whether or not you're buying a used electric vehicle, a used hybrid vehicle that may need to be charged, or a brand new vehicle. We've reached out to probably over 200 individuals and organizations, everyone from the national groups like NRDC and EDF to local city organizations, county councils, regional councils of governments, This past week, a couple weeks ago, we spoke to over 20 legislators in the North Carolina state legislature. One of the key things that we've been working on the past 6 months is we're providing drafting assistance to the Orange County, California Sanitation Office. And we're going to help them develop regulations that will allow them to use biofuels for heavy trucks that are used in the sanitation process. So rather than having to adhere to the new California Air Board's, all EVs, they're going to be able to use their regular vehicles until such time as those become able to be electric. Another thing that we're working on is a law that we hope to have introduced in the state of California that will allow the use of biogas permanently for fuel at waste treatment plants and at other locations. In addition, we have a Nevada state senator who reached out to us. He's doing some research on climate. We've assisted some members of Congress who have additional legislation they want to introduce this year. And we're now working with staff in the House of Representatives to give them some ideas to draft legislation on the Farm Bill that's coming up in 2023, which is a 5-year law. The reason we want to share with you that we have some successes is because a lot of times when we reach out to people, it's like, so has anybody taken this and done anything with it? And the answer is yes. But as Rick mentioned, it may be a part of the law. We may not know what they've done. The idea behind the model laws is it's a template, it's a starting place, but everything needs to be individualized for locality or state need. And as you all probably know, many state legislators only go into session January to the spring or partial time during the year. And so those individuals and their staff are getting ready this fall, preparing legislation that they would like to introduce. And we would love to have them introduce some of our model laws. So if you're with a firm that has a state and local government practice that supports large businesses who might support members of the state legislature, consider reaching out and seeing what they're supporting and whether or not they would support some climate provisions. Jordan will go through a lot of our options that are available, and we think most of our provisions so far would be available on a bipartisan basis. So we think there's a lot of room for agreement on this. What I'd like to close with is we've just formed a climate justice advisory committee. We're getting members and we'll probably start meeting next year. And the idea behind a climate justice advisory board, as our first two speakers mentioned, is it's really critical to think about the underserved, underprivileged, under part of the solution communities. When we think about all of our climate legislation, what we want to do is not only be cognizant of not damaging those communities any further, but maybe thinking more broadly and making sure that they're part of the benefits that people are receiving. So one example of this would be as EV legislation was introduced, one of the things we worked on was to make sure that secondary EVs, used EVs, would also get the federal tax credits. And as states go into legislative session this coming January, many states are also considering under additional tax rebates and tax credits for a range of energy efficient solutions. Tax credits don't benefit people that don't have resources as much as rebates at point of sale do. So it's thinking thoroughly about an issue, about who it impacts, and how we can again make benefiting from our new solutions for climate available to everyone. I look forward to hearing from many of you on this call afterwards. Would really appreciate your contacts and support in reaching out to other legislators, city councils, and anyone you're working with at the federal level as well. And now I'll turn this over to Jordan. Thank you.
Thanks, Carla. My name is Jordan Giroux. I am an energy attorney, and within the LPDD project, I research and curate a lot of the resources on our website. So I'm going to give you a brief walkthrough of lpdd.org. You can see where all of these great model laws go to live and what kind of resources they live alongside. So this is our homepage. as we've mentioned, as Rick mentioned, we have a lot more than just the model laws that our team has drafted. To give you a sense of scale, this is a live ticker that updates every time we post. We've divided the universe into 327 different pathways, which are kind of like subjects. A pathway within light duty vehicles might be EV charging electric rate design. How do you figure out how to charge, what to charge for electricity for these vehicles? And within each of those pathways or subjects, we've identified over 2,000 different resources. And those resources might be our own model law that we've drafted. They might be a model law that another organization has drafted, but that we think highly of. They might be actual laws that are out there on the books in different jurisdictions that we think, while we're not trying to be to cover the field and publish everything that's ever been written on this, but things that we think are really worth learning from, we will post. And sometimes even a white paper that is particularly prescriptive that could really help policymakers think through the questions. All of these sorts of things are cataloged on this website, and I'm going to show you a little bit about how to navigate it. If you hear those big numbers and think, wow, this seems huge, how could I begin to approach it? We hear that quite a bit. So if you want to learn a little about some of our top resources, we actually put a tab here right at the top of the page where we link to our top 10 list of things that excite us the most in a bunch of the most popular sectors of the economy, like existing buildings, new buildings, distributed energy, electricity charges, light duty vehicles, etc. So if you were to click through and follow any one of these, for example, this is what one of these top 10 lists looks like. This is for light duty vehicles. And you can see that in this case, we've had some great active firms. Most of these, I'm happy to say, are things that firms wrote for us. But a couple things come from out there in the universe, like the Regulatory Assistance Project has a great compendium of model language. And California has a nation-leading zero emissions vehicle regulation that other states can adopt. So we just try to highlight some of the top things for folks who want to just skim off the top. If you have a little more time, the website is organized, I already mentioned this buzzword, by pathways. This pathways tab gets you in the first level of that. You see we've broken down the economy by sector here. And as you click through to any one of these, you can start to find yourself within a sector of the economy like existing buildings. What all do we have on existing buildings? Well, here's a brief description of the chapter. Here's that top 10 resources list in case you want to skip to that. And then here are some of the pathways. Building energy performance standards is a very hot one right now. It's a nascent area where legislators are starting to determine, hey, we need a different type of regulatory tool to address existing buildings and their energy intensity, where building codes would only traditionally apply to new buildings or substantially modified buildings. So there's maybe half a dozen jurisdictions around the country that have drafted regulations like this. And then because this is such a hot area, there's a few different model reports that have come out and said, here's what you should learn from all these legislative attempts. In fact, the Institute for Market Transformation authored the first model on this subject that we know of. So, and if you click through to view that, all of these documents live on the website. To give you another example, let's say you're interested in how we cite renewable energy. The Inflation Reduction Act that came out a couple months ago was a big deal in terms of funding these projects. And a substantial question is, let's say you have some renewable energy projects out there that are ready for funding, but there seems to be a boondoggle of different state and local permitting regulations that can tie these up. Under utility scale renewables, we have a couple different tabs that point to the same model law that our friend Daniel is going to talk about in a moment, actually. overcoming local permitting opposition. We'll address a lot of the different ways people are working with local governments to try and make sure that the permitting process gets streamlined for these projects so they're not tied up for years. And we have a recently published LPDD model law on the subject that tries to find a fair balance of splitting power between a state regulatory body and local permitting authorities so that we can get these systems built efficiently. A couple other tricks for going through the website. If you don't think that you can navigate your way through this Pathways tab, but you have something in mind that you're searching for or a level of government that you might like to find it under, you can go to our search function. And let's say I know I'm looking for something about building energy and I pull up building energy performance standards. This is that pathway I just showed you. That's going to highlight 11 resources. And let's say I want to look within that body of work just at the state level. If I just do those two click through jobs there, I highlight immediately the two pieces of state legislation that have gone forward on this subject. So that'll hopefully be a good navigational tool for you. Last two things I want to mention is obviously the work product that we're most proud of is that which our pro bono attorneys prepare themselves, that we have our team of peer experts review exhaustively. And so we have all of that helpfully cataloged at the front end of the website. The model laws tab is always on the top. And you can see, I believe it's about 60 model laws now here and where they fall within this hierarchy of information. So here's all of the laws we have under light duty vehicles. As I said, a very healthy drafting area for us. And you can see the rest of them down the page like that. Lastly, you saw Rick's information. You can find all of our contact information under the Get Involved tab. We have a few different contact informations for different elements of this project. Here's Rick's again. So please reach out to us, find us. We'd love to work with you in the future. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Daniel Loud, who will tell us a little bit more about the drafting process on his end.
Great. Thanks, Jordan. And thanks again, everybody, for having me and inviting me to talk on this. So my name is Daniel Loud. I am now a second-year associate. And before that was a student at Columbia. Yeah, so we drafted one of the model laws that Jordan pointed out on expediting siting for renewable energy projects at the state level, which was a really exciting project that we just wrapped up about a month ago, a little over a month ago now. And so, you know, it was an incredible opportunity. So like Rick mentioned, you know, I actually kind of came into my firm wanting to do this and sort of took the initiative to bring my firm into this project and to get us involved with it, and then have done, you know, a good amount of the work on drafting and the peer review and the whole process that you were told about a few minutes ago. So, you know, I've been told that that was unique, but to be honest, I think it was really not that difficult of a process, and more importantly, it was an incredible learning experience for someone coming out of law school. So I believe we had a couple of law students signed up for today, so going to gear this maybe a little bit more towards you if you're listening. But you know, I hope this will be useful to everybody who's listening today. So how I got involved with this project, I will say I was a little lucky. I was one of Professor Gerard's teaching assistants when I was at Columbia, Professor Gerard, who literally wrote the book on this. So I knew about this project through my entire time at law school and had it flagged as something that I wanted to get involved in eventually. When I came to my firm, I started in September of last year. I knew it was something I'd like to see the firm take on. And in what I guess was another bit of a stroke of luck, the firm had a young climate practice that didn't have any billable work yet, but was looking to build up its expertise so that it could bring in that work eventually. So, I mean, this is where I'd say, you know, I was able to be a little successful in bringing the firm into this project. Because basically, while it's a pro bono project, I really tried to emphasize the marketing potential and the business development potential that this has for firms as well. Besides being obviously good and beneficial for the planet, for a firm that is looking to enter this space and to build some expertise here, it's an incredible opportunity. So, you know, our firm was one that had been involved in some energy work before, knew a little bit about siting. So it seemed like the area that made the most sense for the firm to get involved in, besides just being interesting, you know, on an academic level. So, you know, I found through this sort of climate group, but even if the firm that you end up going to doesn't have one like that, you'll be able to find the partners who are interested in this, and partners are always looking for business development opportunities. And so I raced this with the partner who ran my firm's climate group, and, you know, emphasized again the sort of business development potential that this had. And it was definitely a learning experience in terms of, you know, navigating the sort of firm bureaucracy that you do hear about sometimes. But overall, I mean, it really moved pretty quickly for me, at least. And then when the project did eventually get off the ground, I was the one who was primarily responsible for the drafting and sort of seeing this through the process. It was me and one of counsel at the firm who were really working on this. And so, I mean, it was an incredible experience in that way, because we were really able to, I as a first year, was really able to think through some issues that, you know, as a first year, you don't really think is almost your place to think through. You know, one, business development. I mean, that's something that is not really your job as a first year, at least the way you normally think about it. But this project did kind of force me to think about how I can help generate business for my firm in the future, but also how I can build my own skills and practice as a lawyer. You know, this is something that I hope an issue that I can stay involved with, you know, hopefully billable clients in the future. And that's something that I don't think I would have really gotten the chance to think about as deeply as I have if I hadn't been involved in this project. But beyond that, you know, the ability that I had to sort of really do the day-to-day management of this project also helped me develop my own skills just as a lawyer, you know, the sort of strategic thinking that, again, as a first year, you know, you want to learn how to do, but is usually the final calls are made by people above you. And while that still was the case on, you know, the big questions with this project, overall, I really did have a lot of discretion in how to do this, which was good for me. I mean, it really was an incredible experience that allowed me to grow and develop my own skills. So, you know, that is, I guess, kind of the description of how I got involved with this and you know, where I took it. I really would emphasize that you should try to get involved with this. You know, obviously while you're still in law school, if you are, but even if you're just beginning, you can really make an impact at your firm and really start to develop your career earlier on in a positive way. So, you know, happy to answer any questions, but I think I'm going to hand it back off to Rick. And again, thank you for listening.
Well, thank you, Daniel. Very well done. Well done by all. Hopefully, other young lawyers who are listening in can take advice from Daniel and get their firms involved. And if you're a more senior lawyer, love to get your firm involved to either as drafting, as peer review, or involved in outreach. Before I turn it back to Tracy, let me just make a couple of comments and observations here. One question that many lawyers and law firms have is, how do I deal with conflicts? And my answer is usually that, with 1,500 recommendations, there is some area here in climate change work that will fit with your client base and avoid conflicts. So for example, if you represent ExxonMobil, you're certainly not going to take on phasing out gasoline in automobiles, but there are other areas such as carbon capture and sequestration, direct air capture, a number of other areas where it would not be a conflict at all to take on this kind of work. So if you're concerned about avoiding conflicts, which obviously every lawyer needs to be wary of that, there's something here for everybody. There's also I see some firms who, like Daniel, sort of want to build an area of practice and get expertise. Other firms will say, no, I want to use the expertise I have. Our sweet spot is X. Let's do something in that area. We typically leave it up to lawyers to select the recommendation and the area that they want to take on. So again, I'm sure Tracy will repeat this as well, but if you're at all interested, reach out to us. I'd love to talk to you and get you involved in some way in this process. So Tracy, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thank you, Rick. And thank you everyone who has spoken today. I wanted to give our audience a chance to ask any questions that they might have about either of the programs or just SEER's pro bono initiative in general. So if you have questions, please feel free to come off of mute and ask them now, or you can always put them in the chat as well. So any questions? And Kevin just put contact information for the two programs in the chat box for people who are interested.
Tracy, if there's no questions, this is Rick. I'd like to ask a question of Daniel, if I might. Daniel, can you explain, how you found the peer review process, dealing with peer reviewers, sort of the back and forth? Was that helpful? Just give us your general impressions of that, and maybe your takeaway in terms of what you learned.
Sure. Yeah, I thought I was about to get out scot-free. No,
no way, man.
Yeah, no, it was a very positive process. Honestly, it took, I would say, somewhere around 3 months or so to get through, the real substantive peer review. And I mean, I think it's a really important part of the process. I feel like what was sort of the priority from the template through to, the first model statute that we put together in the supporting memorandum was really like to get the policy and the priorities in place. But, there are two things that I think the peer review was most important for. One is there are just issues that you don't think about, that, when you're too close to it, you're kind of focused on getting, your perfect baby together, I guess I would say. And so there were things that, I didn't consider, like, our initial draft of this, which, I do believe that the model law that we drafted still would, if it were enacted, strike a pretty good balance between local and state authority. Our first one was pretty aggressive in favor of the state and limiting local authority. And our peer reviewer went back to us and basically said, like, this is great, I like this, but this is never going to get enacted anywhere. And, these are just issues that I especially, you know, I'm a litigation associate. Like, I don't really think about what elected officials would be responsive to. So these are issues that were not really in my head, and, you know, in the successive drafts, we brought in, but, you know, again, to try and not compromise the policy that we set out at the beginning. And the second thing that I would say really did for us was to, you know, kind of add in the technical know-how. You know, the peer reviewers are usually very involved in this area, and at least for my firm, again, this might not be true for every firm if you're trying to, you know, act on your own expertise. But if you're trying to build it and build a process, build a practice, there are things that you're just not as familiar with. You know, we had a couple of terms in there that made perfect sense to me, but, you know, as the peer reviewer went through and was like, I see what you're trying to say here, but this isn't really how it works in the real world. And so again, you know, it's just kind of a useful reality check in a way. So again, when the final product came out, I do think that we had a good vision in place, and that, you know, what we had decided on very early on was still in there, but I think it's more realistic, and hopefully, you know, this has only been out for about a month, so I wasn't expecting any legislators to enact it by now, but, you know, hopefully at some point, this will be a more appealing option to legislatures as they start to look at it.
Terrific.
Any other questions from the audience? Abigail, you've got your hand up.
Hi, I'm a law student who wants to get involved, and I just wanted to ask if the program can be participated in virtually, or will we be assigned like one in our city, like to participate in person?
Which program are you referring to?
Either one would be fine. Like, they both sound really good.
Okay. Rick and Blake, do you want to answer that question?
I can go. Well, a lot of the projects are facilitated largely through Zoom. So you could be matched with someone, you know, really anywhere. However, I believe that Eric's, you know, pro bono volunteer was actually in the DC area. So you know, they were in the same region and may have met. I believe they did meet a couple times in person. So both are possible for us. And like more often than not, it's, you know, via Zoom and virtual.
Thank you.
And for our project, the LPDD project, it obviously can be virtual. It really is, you know, it's drafting. For law students, though, and let me emphasize this, we do require senior oversight, whether it's from a law professor or a clinic, but would love to get law students involved who have that oversight. And there's no need to be physically present either here in New York or in DC or anywhere else. It's all done virtually.
Thank you.
Great. Do we have any other questions? All right. Well, before we close, I just want to remind everyone, the contact information is in the chat box. We definitely would like to get people signed up for both of these projects. So if you're interested in volunteering, please reach out and contact Blake or Rick, or you can go through SEER's website and fill out the form on the website as well. So with that, if there are not any remaining questions, we will go ahead and end today's webinar. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope that we get a chance to see you all become volunteers. Thank you.